kind of fascinating to think about whether he meant this literally, right? Did Christ mean literally we should call each other fathers? Actually, right after he says don't call someone teachers, he says, and this is in a critical light, but he says, you teachers of the law, you hypocrites. Very, very interesting. So I'll leave that up to each of us. I think it's kind of crazy to think, okay, we'll stop using some of these terms to describe each other, but I think he's speaking to the deeper truth of reality, of life, which is that God is the source of all good things, all instruction, not just in the outward teacher, the one that seems outside of us in our consciousness, but the one that learns is the real teacher, you could say, because unless your inner sadguru, teacher, whatever, isn't willing and isn't ready to hear something, you're not going to hear it. And so the Father, the Divine Father that Christ often talks about, that is the Father, of course, he's speaking of. It's their only Father. It's our only parents in this kind of spiritual light. Because our parents, they are not separate from God. It's not demoting them. It's actually highlighting the divinity of our dads, of our fathers, and that fatherly energy. And I think sometimes today this can feel a little touchy because in a lot of our lives our fathers have let us down in many ways. And some of us may have had abusive fathers, know of abusive fathers, of course. Right? But of course, that's not the Father that Christ is speaking of. That's not the fatherly energy. That's not true fatherhood, fatherdom. And I think this is the heart of what he means by saying there's only one Father. Don't call anyone earthly father, anyone on earth father. So to me that means, well, when you say Father, you should remember that their fatherhood isn't of earth. It's not on earth. It's from God. It's sourced in divinity. We should remember the Divine Father in all that we do according to Christ. And especially when we're using these terms that are denoting the one, the only being there truly is, God. I feel like unless we go more, let's say, mystical with Jesus' words, it can feel probably a little lost. I wonder how a lot of Christians do it. Because clearly most Christian churches who say they take the Bible purely literally, well, I just look at the good book, they're still calling people Father, teacher, rabbi. It's interesting. It's interesting. How can you do that without starting to break down the walls of the sense of separation that we have with God? God is three persons, and we're distant from God. We can never live up to God. All these things that many religions have kind of concocted against the words of their scriptures often. We can feel this way too. It's not just them. We can live this way, feeling that we're separate from the Father, from God. And so today, it's funny, I termed the sermon the Dad Bod of God. And I wasn't talking about my body, but I was talking about how, well, a lot of things, right? The body of God in our fathers, expressed in our fathers, not in any one specific kind of dad bod. And even further, how often our fathers aren't held very lovingly in that way. I feel maybe because dads and men have had so much power, it's kind of coming full circle, right? The toxicity often, when we talk about body positivity, we're talking about women's bodies. We make fun of dad bods. We make fun of whatever men's expressions, whatever they're wearing, etc. Today in pop culture, it's a thing. If you don't know it, believe me, it's a thing. But yet, those expressions are also living embodiments of God. And Yeah, sometimes men don't behave super well, sometimes women don't either. But this body positivity has to extend to all of us, all of us. And I think often men have kind of this, it didn't matter what they looked like, that was the feeling, right? And women were held to this amazingly hard, difficult standard. And our genderqueer, no one even talked about it. And so as we lean into this positivity, in the places it does matter with women, with others, we should also be supportive of our dad's expressions. Funny. And so today when I was thinking about the Dad Bod of God, it hit all these different things. I couldn't help but try to connect them. Because if God is our only Father, if God is the true masculine, that's just a word we make up, right? We're talking about people here. If God is shining through people, then God is one with the expressions around us. Not just the core of life, not just the joy they share, the peace they share. God is with them in their tough times. And we know through the history of the West, especially, men haven't really been invited to share their feelings very often. They can get bottled up and come out with anger, dominating kind of sense of needing control because we haven't created spaces for them to really be free. Starting, remember kind of Little House on the Prairie, everyone's sitting in these little desks and getting hit with rulers and stuff. And that's not very far off. We live this, right? This kind of management system, this social management system, where we prepare our young men to be factory workers, etc. We tell them not to cry. But crying is part of what it means to be human, which means it's part of what it means to express God. Maybe not forever, as it says God will wipe every tear from their eyes in Revelation. But for the time being, we're carrying trauma, we're carrying hurt. And we often, as people, not just men, don't feel like we can express ourselves. We don't feel like we're seen. And so the Dad Bod of God is all these things. It's not God, if God is expressed in all of heaven, as Swedenborg wrote, our favorite spiritual thinker, and God is expressed in heaven as a whole, then all the aliens, all the genders, all the expressions in heaven, they fill in a little gap of what it means to express God. All of us have an originality to us. No one is cookie cutter the same, not even the closest twins on this earth or elsewhere. And if the more heaven grows in diversity, as Swedenborg wrote, the more it's made perfect, the more it's made an expression of God, full of different traditions and religions, ideas about God, although maybe there's some core understanding that's shared, then the diversity of life around us, of course, plays a part in that, as an expression of God, the Dad Bod of God. And sometimes I think when we open ourselves to this acceptance of others, it can feel a little unwieldy at times. It can feel a little heavy, like a good dad bod. It can feel a little scary, actually. But I think returning to this understanding that we are one with the Father, with the Mother, with the parent, that we are not separate, it's not something we have to reach for. In fact, often our sense of trying pulls us away from the peace of God. Pulls us away from the light of understanding. And if we tap into this idea, this understanding of unity within ourselves, we can start to let go of the fear that we often rightfully have towards men, towards life, towards society. I mean, think of a greater meat grinder than our social systems today. Often, anyway. We can start to let go of this fear and center on something greater, the Father. Turn to the Father within. Of course, Christ was using a word that for his people denoted closeness, denoted leadership, denoted the source of all. He was speaking a little differently than we would hear back then, using this idea of the Father and one with the Father, and close to the Father. This is our Father God. To share that we are all children of God. We are all one in God. And as we open ourselves to that understanding, beyond words really, it's actually just a piece of being here now. We can look upon others that we may not always feel close to, feel like we know, feel like we can see. And start to see ourselves, our own childlikeness, the divine childlikeness of God, of the Father within them. And as teachers, as friends, we all have to be careful. Because as he said, we often don't center from the right place. We often bar the gates of heaven for those who want to enter. Not entering it ourselves either, as he said. And so today, let's just take a few moments to open ourselves to heaven, to God, to the Father known by many names, our divine Mother, Great Spirit, Creator, Jehovah, Elohim.